Hello there, you are watching the Press Preview, a first look at what's on the front page of the morning's newspapers as they arrive. Now, in the next half an hour, we'll see what is making headlines with the barrister and former government minister, Anna Soubry, and the former Home Affairs correspondent at the BBC, Danny Shaw. So let's see what's on some of those front pages, and we'll start with the front page of the Eye. BBC in crisis is the headline, as police are called in over star accused of teen sex scandal. According to The Sun, the corporation is now holding urgent talks with the government. The Daily Star says there are questions over why it took the Director General, Tim Davie, so long to act. Daily Express has the same story. The Metro, their headline, the crisis engulfing the BBC. It's also the main story of the Daily Mail. Now, away from that BBC story, The Guardian report that more than 50 MPs, including the former Prime Minister Theresa May, have held stakes in publicly listed companies without disclosing the fact because there's currently no requirement for them to do so. The Financial Times says that Germany and the US are under pressure to show greater support for Ukraine eventually joining NATO. And to remind you that by scanning the QR code that you see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of the papers while you watch along with us. Now, as I said, tonight we're joined by Anna Soubry and Danny Shaw. There they are in the big screen. And let's go straight to them and get straight into some of these front pages. Anna, Danny, really great to have you with us this evening. And Danny, let me start with you as the ex-BBC man, if we can, and we'll start with The Sun as the first front page. The Sun, of course, broke this story. There are so many elements of the story that we can talk about and many things that we can't. Talk to us about the reporting here on the front page of The Sun.
Well, The Sun is reporting that as soon as this news broke, this BBC name made a panicked call to the youngsters, sort of saying, "What have you done?" That's the bit of detail that The Sun has got, that they sort of spun out onto the third day of coverage of this. But in essence, I mean, that doesn't take it, terribly much further than, what we've known previously. I think, at the moment, what we could say about this is that, the BBC is certainly, facing some really serious questions. We don't exactly know what the nature of the complaint was when it was made in May. We understand that the complaint about this individual was made in May, but we don't know the nature of that and how serious it was and how much detail was given. I mean, if you're a high-profile person at the BBC, you do unfortunately, get complaints against you. Sometimes it's someone just, moaning about the colour of your tie. Other times it might be that you've said something that's biased, and other times it might be something to do with your private life. So we don't know what that complaint was and how it was handled. And there is a report in the Mail, for instance, that says that Tim Davie, the Director General of the BBC, wasn't aware until Thursday that there was a complaint against this individual. Well, that may be because it was a very sort of low-level thing, very vague, many complaints come in. It might be that it was completely mishandled. We just don't have the detail yet about that. But certainly, I think, I can imagine what's been going on over the past few days at the BBC, having worked there for 31 years. There will have been frantic phone calls. I think you would have seen bosses in the building on a Sunday, which you don't normally see, as people try and sort of get the position clear, get a statement out there and try and show that they're sort of in control of what's going on. Yeah,
and Anna, come in on this and let's show our viewers the front page of the Daily Express, which has a picture there of Tim Davie as well. And as Danny was mentioning there, this seems to have changed slightly for the BBC on Thursday when they say in their statement more allegations were made to them and of a different nature. That's how they term it in their statement. But I guess the question for many people and the question that some of the papers are asking is why it took the DG, Tim Davie, quite so long to act.
Exactly. And there are two things that immediately strike me. Is that this story is just spiralling completely and totally out of control of the BBC. And they've got to get a grip on it quickly, as Danny has said. There'll no doubt be meetings. But why has it taken so long? Because, again, it looks like that the BBC is incapable of handling things properly. And look, we know they've got a bad track record on this. Let's be honest about it. It's Jimmy Savile. It was Rolf Harris. And then we have the complete hypocrisy, some would say, of the fact that it was the BBC who put the helicopter up, you'll remember, over Cliff Richard before he'd even been arrested, never mind charged. And it turned out to be wholly unsubstantiated, appallingly false claims against him, and many would say his reputation, and he himself hit the harm that it caused him. So the Beeb has a really bad track record on handling these scandals properly, and it looks like that's happening again. However, I have to say this, that I have an element of sympathy with the BBC, because if you try and put this in any other context of somebody having a complaint about somebody and ringing up their employer and saying to the employer, do you know what your employee has or hasn't been doing in relation to my son? Because we now know it's a son, and we know it's a mother that's made a complaint. I mean, it's difficult to imagine such a set of circumstances, because you don't normally go running to an employer. You would actually go off to the police, or you might instruct a solicitor or take some other measure, because it's not the role of the BBC, I would have thought, to have been the arbitrator in all of this, if what is being said is true. And let's be honest about this, there is a ring of truth about it. I don't think it's doubted that this woman has rung the BBC and she has made this complaint. They've got to grip this now, and they've got to grip it quick.
And Danny, answer some of those questions as we look at the front of the Daily Star there. I mean, Anna is right. She's laid out a litany of issues the BBC's faced over the past decade or so, which does not stand the corporation in good stead in trying to deal with these kind of crises. You worked there for 31 years, as you told us. What is it, particularly about the organisation, that means when these sort of things come up, the BBC seems to, let it get away from it? Because, the truth is going to out with this, isn't it?
Well, the first thing to say is it's a big organisation, it's a bureaucracy, and that sometimes makes things very difficult to get clear decision-making and quick decision-making. The second thing is they have had a reputation in the past of protecting their stars and protecting people who are absolutely central to their programmes. I think, this might be why some of the staff at the BBC are reportedly upset. And while Tim Davie actually sent an email to staff today to sort of reassure him that action was being taken, because the one thing that used to infuriate me and other people at the BBC was when you had sort of one rule for the high-profile, presenters, the people, the household names, as it were, and another rule for the sort of more junior members of staff, the producers and so on. That was absolutely enraged people. So I think that's one reason that, perhaps in the past, some celebrities and others have been indulged. We don't know if that's the case this time. But I think Anna's right that, the handling of, there's certainly question marks potentially about the handling of it, but it's not too late for the BBC to grip this. If it's true that the full nature of the allegations only became clear towards the end of last week, then the BBC's still got time to get a grip of the situation. They've taken the steps of suspending the individual concerned, and they're contacting the police, because potentially, and we don't know the full story, just remember that we've just got a couple of bits of this. It sounds to me like quite a complicated story, quite nuanced. Some of it may be to do with private life, which has got nothing to do with the BBC and the employer. Some of it may step over the line into criminal behaviour, which obviously is really serious, but it's just complicated at the moment. But the BBC has still got time, I think, to get control of this situation and to take the right action. They seem to be, slowly starting to do that by what they've done today. Thank you for that, Danny. And Anna, let me bring you back in and we'll bring up the front page of the Eye, because Danny's kind of moved us on to the element I wanted to discuss next with you, Anna, as a KC. The police are involved in this now. Danny's mentioned it. It's very complicated, but there is, some sense that there could be legal action taken once we do find out fully what's happened here. And that adds a further element, I guess, to this situation. Yes. I have to correct you. It's very kind of you to elevate me to King's Counsel, but I'm not. I am a criminal barrister, though, and I'm a practising criminal barrister. My apologies, Anna, but you deserve it anyway. Well, that's very sweet of you. But as I know, we all want to be serious about this. The reference to the police, I think, is critical, because when you have got
again, we don't know all the detail, but we're getting a feel about some of these allegations. And there's questions about whether or not this person was 17 and whether images were sent, in which case that could fall very much into a criminal offending. Then you've got to put this into the police. And I think that when this is when it all unravels and we learn far more about it, I strongly suspect that one of the questions that will be asked of the BBC is whether or not, when they had any suspicion about the fact that there could be an element of criminality, they should immediately have referred it into the hands of the police, because that is what should happen in these cases. And then that is all clouded by saying, well, why hasn't the mother gone to the police? And then again, we get into the realms of speculation. And again, that is not good. And so in some ways, I think everybody needs to kind of cool down and come back a bit, because there could be a criminal investigation, there could be charges, and those things have got to be done properly and without any form of prejudice whatsoever.
Right, entirely right. The Financial Times front page, we can pick up here. As I said, President Biden and Rishi Sunak will both be going to Lithuania to Vilnius for the NATO Leaders Summit. And Anna, if we look at the front page of the Financial Times there, we'll talk about that picture in a moment, because that is kind of linked to what we're talking about here. But first, NATO allies piling pressure on Germany and US over Ukraine joining NATO. I mean, tell us about the reporting here, because of course we know that everyone wants Ukraine to try and join, but as everyone clearly keeps pointing out, they are at war, and that would trigger Article 5.
Yeah, this is tricky stuff, isn't it? And so, if they would, as you say, if Ukraine joins NATO, then that puts NATO into a very difficult situation. But on the other hand, of course, allies want Ukraine to join NATO because we want to be there to help them and to protect them as much as we can. But it would clearly be an escalation of things, and that may not obviously go Ukraine's way. And it could involve all those other member states in a way that, again, using Article 5 and other things, that would cause big problems. So this is a very tricky situation. And I truthfully don't know what the answer to it is, because I feel conflicted, because I don't want things to escalate against it to the disadvantage of the Ukraine. But on the other hand, I think it's absolutely critical that all of those countries, allies, stick by it. And of course, in due course, it should be both a member of NATO and, I would say, also a member of the EU, which I think also is very important for the future of that country.
Yes, and that's, of course, I'm sure will be discussed at this NATO leaders meeting in Vilnius, Danny. And I guess it comes at a time, a really important time for the alliance, and a time when, despite, the sort of tensions over Ukraine, the alliance needs to be shown to have one focus, sticking together, because this is vitally important, and the Russians will be watching whatever comes out of that meeting.
Yes, and I'm pretty confident, I'm sure, that when everyone's gathered for that meeting, the diplomats doing their work behind the scenes, laying the groundwork and so on, that they'll come up with some kind of form of words which, while not admitting Ukraine to NATO now or imminently, they will sort of lay the path for that in the future, or say the steps that need to be taken. I believe there's also some kind of NATO-Ukraine Council that's been formed, which will also show that there's very close bonds between NATO and Ukraine, but without that formal admission. I think Joe Biden is saying that there are certain stipulations, there's certain measures that have to be taken by Ukraine before it can be admitted, notwithstanding its support during the war. So there are probably a number of reasons why it's not going to happen, but I suppose it's crucial about the form of words that's arrived at the end of this meeting, and that's what everyone, I guess, will be waiting for. Yeah,
there was talk, of course, in the past few weeks about security guarantees similar to what sort of Israel has, and I guess we'll wait and see in a couple of days what does come out of that meeting. But you're right, Danny, there will have to be a communique which lays out the support without going so far as admitting Ukraine to NATO just yet. All right, let's move on to something completely different, guys, if we can. And this is to the Metro. And our producers have picked this out because, Brad Pitt's looking great in a racing suit. And Anna, because I saw your face there when I brought up the picture, this is Brad Pitt's preparation for his new F1 movie.
Yeah, and apparently, I say apparently because I have to tell you, this story doesn't particularly grab me. I mean, I think that Brad Pitt is
Anna,
exceptionally
you're joking.
No, I think he's a great actor and all the rest of it. But the controversy is apparently because at the age he is, he's going to be playing somebody an awful lot younger than him. And I say, what's wrong with that? Why aren't we being rather ageist in saying that he shouldn't be doing that? Come on, Danny. I mean, I don't know whether do you feel outraged by this in some disturbed in some way by this?
The film's about an aging F1 driver, isn't it? Isn't that the premise of the film, Danny?
I think something like that. I mean, I was just more struck by the fact that, you know, in the middle of the Grand Prix, when you've had security concerns about Just Stop Oil, you've got motor cars racing around at 200 miles an hour, that they've allowed this filming to take place. I mean, can you imagine the insurance that had to be involved in that? Normally these things are done on a set, or they're sort of mocked up somehow using CGI, whatever the latest techniques are. But here they've actually got permission to film at the Grand Prix at Silverstone, which I found, that was pretty impressive.
Yep, and the film will be coming out eventually. All right, quick thought from both of you. Front page of The Guardian. Anna, cricket fan, Ashes are still in the balance, 2-1.
Now you're talking. F1 leaves me cold. I used to follow it, but no longer. But now, finally, we have won a really important game. Because, of course, if we'd lost this game, then and Australia had won, then they would have won the Ashes. Mm-hmm. And frankly, the next two games would have been pretty, a bit boring. When they've won already, and the other two games just become sort of what's the point? But we won it. So now those two games are going to be absolutely brilliant and critical. That the English team did play well. They got there in the end.